Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are talking about the movie Hacksaw Ridge, which came out in 2016. It was directed by Mel Gibson and written by Andrew Knight and Robert Schenken. And it's based on the 2004 documentary, The Conscientious Objector, directed by Terry Benedict. And we watched that documentary as well. And you can also watch it if you would like. It's available on YouTube. Mart, what did you think of this movie?
I really enjoyed this movie. I've seen it many times. Though every time I watch it, I get confused as to why I like it in some bits because it's so violent. And I'm like, why did I like this again? But I do realize why I like it. It's got Andrew Garfield in it, for one. And I like Andrew Garfield. And it's just like, I don't know, it's such an inspiring, strange, unbelievable story. And the storytelling is good and the movie making is nice. But yeah, I like it. How about you?
Yeah, I'm sure I first saw this movie because it starred Andrew Garfield. And I think he is a great actor. At the time, I did know it was directed by Mel Gibson, and we should say noted anti-Semite Mel Gibson because he is not a good guy and Hollywood keeps giving him more chances. But anyway, he also, of course, made The Passion of the Christ, and he's known for being very religious, which is not really my bag in terms of media. So I was kind of thinking it might hit those religious overtones a bit too much, but I found that the movie walked that line pretty well. We should mention that this, of course, is based on the true story of Seventh-day Adventist Desmond Doss during World War II. And yeah, quite a few of the things that happened in the movie actually happened in real life, even the things that seem most unlikely and unrealistic. So I did like that. I enjoyed the battle scenes. As you say, they are quite violent, and I thought it was well acted by Andrew Garfield in particular. And there's a sort of romantic subplot that sometimes in these movies can feel phoned in, but I thought it was pretty decent and did actually contribute to the movie for me. So yeah, overall, I did like it.
Perfect. So let's get into the movie. We open on a very brutal battle scene, and this is one of the moments where I'm like, why am I watching this again? Even though I've seen it a million times, because it's very violent. You see lots of dead people, lots of people just dying, and lots of fire, but we also get our first introduction to Desmond Doss, played by Andrew Garfield, as he does a voiceover, a very southern voiceover, expressing his belief in God, and that's kind of what motivates him through the entirety of the movie.
You'll see if you watch the movie at the end, they have a little clip of real Desmond Doss. And if you watch the documentary, they interview him quite extensively. And Andrew Garfield pretty much nails his voice in this. You're right. He's from Virginia, the real Desmond Doss. So he's Southern. It's a bit higher pitched. It's sort of like slow and almost musical sounding.
Yeah, it's very gentle, I would say. I would call it gentle. But when I watched the documentary, I gave up halfway through just because there were no subtitles and I could not understand Old Man Doss very well.
Yeah, the thing too about Doss is that he is very Southern, and as well, he went completely deaf later on in his life and got a cochlear implant. And so that makes his speech a bit unclear sometimes. So I totally hear you. He is occasionally difficult to understand.
There's something about that accent, though. It's very charming, even though it's hard to understand.
So we get introduced to Desmond and his brother Hal as children, as well as their father Tom, played by Hugo Weaving. Desmond badly hurts his brother in a fight, and his mother Bertha, played by Rachel Griffiths, reminds him that murder is the worst sin. And we see Desmond looking at this poster that they have of the 10 Commandments. We also saw in the documentary that the real Dosses had a similar poster up in their house when Desmond was a child. And real life Desmond was, of course, raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, and his parents were strict about nonviolence, vegetarianism, maintaining the Sabbath, which for them was a Saturday, among several other things.
We skip in time to 1942, where adult Desmond helps a man who's been hit by a car. He gives him a tourniquet, and then he takes him to the hospital, where he meets Dorothy Schutte, who's a nurse, and also his future wife. And to be able to spend more time with her, he goes to donate blood with her, which is obviously in the movie, it's kind of an excuse, but he's also a very good man, as we know from real life and from the documentary. Dorothy is played by the wonderful Theresa Palmer.
Yeah, in the documentary, they were talking about how as soon as the appeal went out to give blood, he would walk a 6-mile round trip. He would go as often as they would let him to go and give blood. So real life Desmond, a real G.
Yeah, I feel like in this movie they make things a little bit more streamlined. So they put this accident and is giving blood into one scene because it makes sense to do that.
Desmond's brother Hal, played by Nathaniel Buzolic, shows up to a family dinner at the Doss house. He's enlisted in the army, he's wearing his uniform, and their father Tom, who served in World War I, has quite severe PTSD. He lost many friends in the war, and he reacts very badly to seeing his son in a uniform. When we initially see him in the movie, Tom is visiting the gravestones of his friends that he lost in France, and then he's visiting them again a little while later. So you can tell that even so many years after the war, this is still deeply impacting him, and this seems to also have been taken in real life.
Yeah, I missed a reaction by myself earlier this podcast because I need to say something. I need to say, wait, Hugo Weaving is in this?
Yeah, I forgot he was in this. I didn't remember who played the dad, and then I saw him and I was like, oh yeah, PTSD Hugo Weaving, we meet again.
Exactly. He's very good in this movie. In the beginning, you kind of dislike him quite a bit, but he plays it very human, I would say. He's very good. Desmond also enlists in the army, and he also, almost at the same time, asks Dorothy to marry him. And of course, his father is not very happy. He meets him as he's visiting his friends at the grave, and he's like, you're not gonna like this war. It's gonna be so much worse than you think.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they almost depicted it as Desmond not really getting his father's permission, but sort of wanting to run it by him. He obviously, despite their contentious relationship, he does like respect his father and care about what he thinks and what he has to say. And his father's talking about how even now with Desmond, coming to talk to him about it and everything, he's showing that he thinks too much. He overthinks everything. He likes to sit and pray on things. He's not a guy who jumps into action. And his father thinks that that is not going to serve him well in the war.
No, that does make sense. And in this part of the movie, you don't really know the extent to which his relationship with his dad is strange. You get to see some of that in flashback later on. I don't know, I thought the scene was actually really touching, and I can imagine his father, he's seen men die, and his first son enlists, and then Desmond, and I can't really imagine what that must have been like for a dad who'd been to World War I. I guess we get a little bit of that in the Pacific as well, but it's not as strong as it is in this one.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the first inclination we get, I guess, of Desmond's determination that he's going to be a combat medic and he's not going to hold a firearm because he doesn't believe in killing. And his dad is just like, the war and the army are not going to do what you think they're going to do. They're not going to let you just do whatever you want, kind of thing, which
Right.
He is right about that. But he's also wrong, I think, about the strength of Desmond's conviction. I think everybody is wrong about Desmond's conviction initially.
I know it's a movie that we're watching, but it's really amazing to me how someone can have a conviction that's strong, like in general, whether that's religion or something else, doesn't really matter to me, but just to feel like so strongly that you need to go and do a specific thing. I've never been like that. I'm always very unsure about what I need to go and do in life, so I'm pretty amazed when I see someone who has that.
Desmond arrives at Fort Jackson for basic training. We meet Sergeant Howell, played by Vince Vaughn, as he makes a certain first impression and leads the recruits through their initial training.
He's a dick.
He sure is a dick. Vince Vaughn seems like he's having fun, so that's what matters.
Yeah, I didn't think he was very good as an actor. In the first scene specifically, it feels kind of like a play to me. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know that Vince Vaughn is like a serious actor.
He gets a little bit more serious later on, but then he also gets a scene that feels very unserious. You'll know which one I'm talking about because you also have.
I don't mean serious as in serious versus comedic. I mean, like, I don't know if he's like a serious actual actor. I think he just mainly appears in like comedies and plays himself.
We also meet Desmond's like fellow soldiers in this scene. We get a bit of an introduction, but there are quite a lot of them, and they don't all have recurring roles in this. They get introduced and then they either die or we don't really see them again, so it's sad. In training, Desmond does pretty well, actually, until they are given their M1s, because he refuses to pick up this weapon, as we know. And that means that he's brought in front of Captain Glover, played by Sam Worthington, who looks very clean in this movie the entire time. Doss also refuses to work on a Saturday because that's his Sabbath, and Captain Glover tries to put him in for Section 8, which is mentally unfit for military service.
Yeah, the army really doesn't like Desmond's insistence that he's going to be a combat medic. The whole time you're like, bro, just let him be a combat medic. But no, the army puts him in a rifle infantry unit, and they're like, listen, you're gonna do this thing. And he's like, actually, I'm not.
It's not made super clear, I think, in the movie, but he wasn't initially in a rifle company, I believe, but they put him there to try and flush him out. So we were kind of discussing this off air before we started recording, and on the one hand, I can understand, especially since we talked about it, that him breaking the rules or disobeying orders like that could be seen as kind of poison to the rest of the men, like if they see him disagreeing, then they might get ideas kind of thing. And also, he might be putting other soldiers at risk. But at the same time, we were both like, just let him be a combat medic.
Yeah, I guess the military is not known for its flexibility and willingness to compromise, generally speaking.
No, that's true. And they're also all very big egos, which I think is also part of the problem.
Yeah. So Howell outs Doss to the rest of the company as a conscientious objector so that they will haze him. And the ringleader of all this hazing is a guy called Smitty Riker, played by Luke Bracey. They are not very nice to Doss, as you can imagine. They think that he's a coward. They think that he's going to get them killed. Doss is also given a psychiatric assessment, but he successfully clears it because, of course, he's not mentally unwell. He just has very strong religious convictions. And so Glover and Howell figure if they can't get rid of him that way, they're going to make his life so miserable that he'll want to quit. Basically, just drum him out of the army entirely.
And Smithy is kind of set up to be his arch enemy, I think, in this movie, except for the fact that no one is Desmond Doss's arch enemy. Desmond Doss is just theirs. He doesn't hate anyone. He just lets them hate him. He's like, I'm not gonna fight you. I'm not gonna punch you. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm not gonna offend you. He's very nice, and he really just wants to be in the army, basically.
I sort of liked the way the movie gave us that scene early on of the scene where he nearly kills his brother when they're kids, because you do get the sense that he has violence in him, or he could have it in him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of this is also due to, I just think Andrew Garfield's an incredible actor. You always get the sense of this sort of rich inner life, that there are things going on beneath the surface. You can tell that he has these convictions, and that even if he might feel like he doesn't want to turn the other cheek, that he's going to do it anyway, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like it's a very conscious decision to do that. Yeah. I'm not sure, were any awards given for this movie? I feel like he should have gotten like an Oscar for this or something.
Okay, it won a couple of Academy Awards for Best Sound Mixing and Best Film Editing, but not too much.
No, just smaller award by the looks of it.
Yeah.
I feel like Andrew Garfield is the least awarded person out there, but the most deserving of like an Oscar. And he's just never getting any.
Yeah, but I also feel like he doesn't take roles just because they're Oscar bait. You know what I mean?
True. It's funny talking about that. He's done quite a few roles that involve various religions. I think that's very interesting. I think I saw him say in an interview once that he likes to get into other people's heads like that. And you can tell that he takes it really seriously.
Remind me what other movies that he's been in where he's been super religious?
What's it called? Is it called The Silence, I think? The one where he plays a monk?
Oh, maybe I didn't see that one.
Oh, it's very heavy. I've only seen half of it because it was too intense for me. But he's done that before, and then he's gone Under the Banner of Heaven. So for me, that's kind of a theme in the roles that he picks, and he's done a lot of other things as well. I very much believe him when he acts always. He's very good at making you believe he's the actual person. And I was talking to you about this offline as well. For some reason, Andrew Garfield, despite not really looking like Desmond Doss, he manages to look like Desmond Doss. It's so crazy.
Yeah, he has a just certain like face and body mannerisms for sure.
Yeah. So in this hazing, Doss gets very badly beaten up by the other man, and even Smithy and Howell seem to feel slightly sympathetic towards him, and they keep expecting him to quit, but he doesn't. And then Doss refuses to name the man who beats him up. and that gets him some respect. And you can see especially Howell be like, okay, if that's how it's gonna be, then maybe you should stay. He doesn't say it, but you can see him think it.
Yeah, you can tell that even the guys who are the most hard on him are starting to be like, all right, well, like we tried to get rid of this guy and he wouldn't go. Obviously, there's something more to him than, just being a coward who won't pick up a gun.
Yeah. Every time I think about this being a real story, I'm like, how?
Yeah. So Doss is supposed to go on leave to get married to Dorothy, but Colonel Sankston, played by Robert Morgan, refuses to let him on the grounds that he hasn't technically passed basic training because he hasn't qualified with a rifle. And so he tries to force Doss to take an M1 on the grounds of court-martial. Basically, like, you take this rifle and show me you can use it, or I will court-martial you. And Doss refuses, and of course, that's disobeying a direct order. And he ends up spending some time in a military prison.
Yeah, and he also has a nightmare, and that is what I was talking about earlier. We see it looks to be a memory of his father pulling a gun on his mother and Desmond intervening. And it's interesting that the movie goes in this direction because in real life, Desmond's father is arrested with a gun, or almost arrested with a gun, and his mother tells him to go and hide the gun. And that's the moment he decides he's never going to touch another gun again. And I think the movie is making it seem like it's this altercation, really. That's the turning point for him.
Yeah, I don't hate the change, because in real life, his father had shot at his brother-in-law, I believe, and that was where the whole gun altercation came in. I don't hate the change because, number one, obviously the relationship between the father and the son is huge thematically in this movie. And then I also think that this sort of plays into this thing I was talking about where we see Desmond, almost kill his brother as a kid. And then later on in the movie, we find out that in this altercation with his father, he took the gun off him and pointed the gun at his father. And so it's part of this whole thing of, him being capable of violence and choosing not to do it, choosing the other option.
Yeah, and it does another thing, which is make him, his relationship with his mother is very protective and very loving. And I think it was like that in real life too. They were very close. So I also quite like the change, actually. It reaffirms both his struggles with violence and his father, and also the relationship with his mother at the same time. So I think it's pretty clever.
Yeah. So Tom Doss, that's the Hugo Weaving character, he comes to speak with his old captain from World War I, who is now a brigadier general. And at Desmond's court-martial, he pleads not guilty. And in the nick of time, his father comes with a letter from Brigadier General Musgrove, specifically stating that Doss's rights as a conscientious objector are protected by an act of Congress, which is correct. That was the case in real life. And so Doss is allowed to go and train as a combat medic. And the story in real life is pretty similar. His COs did try to get rid of him by making his life miserable. He was forever on KP duty. They were always trying to shame him into taking a rifle. They went up the chain at one point, but the brass decided that Doss was going to remain with his company. They seemed to think it was sort of an internal dispute that Doss's COs could figure out. Sometime later, his COs did attempt to Section 8 him, but at the hearing, Doss successfully argued that he hadn't actually contravened any Army regulations. And the higher-ups realized that Washington was never going to approve a Section 8 on religious grounds, because that is a whole can of worms. If you know anything about the United States, they find their religious freedoms very, very important. And later on, an order came down that everyone, including cooks and truck drivers, etc., would have to pass a rifle requirement. And that's when that scene kind of happened like it did in the movie, where he's trying to go on leave and they're not letting him go on leave. And an officer tried to court-martial him right there, but another officer actually stepped in and pointed out that it's marked in his file that he's a conscientious objector, which means that he doesn't have to hold a rifle if he doesn't want to. And so he did not end up getting court-martialed. So that's where it deviates a little bit from the movie. But his CO did cancel all of his remaining leaves. He was not allowed to go visit his brother before his brother shipped out with the Navy, which was really, really hard on him. And he was eventually allowed to train as a combat medic because his father made a call to the War Service Commission to remind them of the Roosevelt Proclamation about conscientious objectors not having to bear arms. So that bit with his dad intervening is true.
So yeah, I really like the fact that his dad is ultimately the one kind of helping him to go to war, even though he was probably the biggest objector to it. I thought it was a nice addition. And I also really like a scene slightly before this where Dorothy, after he fails to show up to marry her, comes to see him in the prison. And she's like, just pick up the rifle. It doesn't have to mean anything. But then when he tells her that he really can't do that, she supports him. And I thought that scene was really touching.
Yeah, and she's the one too who phones his parents to tell them kind of what's going on. And when they're talking about how, if he faces this court martial and he gets a dishonorable discharge, that's going to be more important to him even than if he has to go to prison or anything. Like he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he got a dishonorable discharge. And that is kind of what motivates his father, I think, to realize that even though he doesn't want his son to go, he has to, like for the sake of his own soul kind of thing.
Yes, it's another one of those things where he feels very strongly about it. And so he has to go to war. And he does. We skip to May 1945 in Okinawa. Doss's company joins up with another one, and he meets two other combat medics who just came off the line. And they tell him that on Hacksaw Ridge, which is their mission to take the Moah escarpment. That's their mission, but they tell him that medics are a target for the Japanese. So they give him a clean helmet and they make him take off his medic band so he'll look just like another soldier on the ridge. And I thought it was funny that 2 seconds later, I'm not sure if this is an error in the movie making, but in the next scene, as they come up to the ridge, you see like 2 big cases with a big red cross on it. And I'm like, all right, so maybe you can't hit the people, but the people carrying them are wearing big cases with big red crosses on them. So maybe take those off as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I didn't notice that. Yeah. It's interesting because this is May 1945. As you may have noticed, we skipped like 3 years in there. And real Desmond Doss actually also served in Guam and in the Philippines in 1944. So he actually, prior to this, had won, I think it was 2 Bronze Stars. So he had already really commended himself in combat or as a medic in combat. And so this was kind of his third stab at it, I gather.
Yeah. I never even realized because I didn't do my reading. In the movie, it feels like it's his first go at it, to be honest. I'm not sure why they made a choice to do it like that. Probably because this one is obviously the most incredible story.
Right. This is the one for which he wins the Medal of Honor. I don't think it hurts it. I think the movie was long enough without including that other stuff. And if you make this his quote unquote first time where he's proving himself to the other guys, like that makes the story a bit better, I think.
Yeah. Storytelling wise, it's definitely better and more impactful as well. I agree.
The company goes up over the ridge after it's been softened up by Navy artillery. But unfortunately, the Japanese they had dug into the ridge. They'd been on Okinawa for some time, so they'd had time to build all these sort of underground tunnels. And because of that, when the artillery would start pounding them, they would just go underground. And so the Americans come up over the ridge. Things immediately get bloody. Doss ends up saving a man who has lost both legs, even though he's told that they must triage and the man is beyond saving. And this did actually happen in real life. Desmond Doss saved this man, and the man survived the war, and he actually lived to age 72. So that's pretty cool.
Well done, Desmond Doss. I do wonder, I haven't had time to look this up. Were medics a target for the Japanese?
Yeah.
That's disgusting, first of all. But also, oh god, it's kind of smart to target the medics. I kind of hate that it's smart.
Yeah.
They hunker down for the night in their foxholes, and Doss goes back out in the dark to try and get more wounded. With Smitty, they're kind of bonding. They were like each other's biggest enemies, or Smitty thought that Doss was a coward, but they kind of bond over this experience. So they're in this foxhole together and they're kind of bonding, and Smitty tells him that he's kind of an asshole sometimes, and then Doss responds, only sometimes, which made me laugh, and it also makes Smitty laugh, so they bond over that. And then Doss goes to sleep, I believe, and he has a nightmare. And when he wakes up, Smithy tells him that the nightmare that he has is one where he gets skewered, and he tells Smithy about it. And Smithy says, the rifle's right there, it won't bite. And then Doss replies, yes, it will, look around you. And he's right, really. It's very violent. On the battlefield, there is really no religion. It's just murder and death, and except for Doss, obviously.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch a war movie where the focus is on someone who is making the opposite choice, where it's like all this violence is going on around him and he's deliberately choosing not to participate. And this is not seen as a good thing by his compatriots necessarily, at least initially, but like we as the audience are given to understand that it is a good thing, because of course nonviolence is a good thing. And I feel like you don't often see war movies where the hero is a guy who has not done any killing and will not do any killing.
No, I think especially in a war movie, that's unique. And I guess in a war, it's pretty unique as well in real life. Doss also explains the dream that he had about his father and pointing the gun at him to Smithy, and we've already talked about this, but they bond over those things shared between them, really.
The next day, sun comes up, we get more bloodshed. The Americans are overrun by the Japanese. Basically, there's nothing they can do, so they call down an artillery strike and they get the hell off the ridge. But Doss remains behind and he continues to help wounded men. Smitty's severely wounded. Doss carries him to safety, but unfortunately Smitty dies en route. And this is when we see Doss have a momentary crisis of faith, and there's all this stuff going on around him, bullets flying, everything's on fire, there's people yelling, and he's just saying, he's praying to God, he's saying he doesn't know what to do, I don't know what you want, I can't hear you. And then he hears someone yell for a medic. And at that moment, his path forward becomes clear and he understands what God wants him to do.
Yeah, and this is where I started crying for most of the rest of the movie.
Listen, it will put a branch in your eye. I'm not going to lie to you. If you got a soul at all in there, it's going to tug on it a little bit.
Yeah. During basic training, one of the exercises they had was to make knots. And Doss makes a funny looking knot that is kind of compared to a bra. It's a funny scene and it even makes Doss himself laugh a little bit in the beginning. But actually, he uses this knot that he's learned as a sling so he can lower the wounded man off the ridge. I remembered this moment, so when the first scene happened, I was like, just you wait. It's a very satisfying moment in the movie to see him use his kind of botched, not too good use. The higher-ups call up the artillery strike because there are still men up on the ridge. But that does mean that the Japanese come back out of their hiding spots in the ground, and Doss is up there basically by himself at this point, or at least almost by himself. And he doesn't have a gun, so he's having to try really hard to not be seen. And there's a very scary scene where he has to hide a wounded man under a bunch of sand, and he hides himself by pulling a corpse onto himself as the Japanese pass, and he almost gets killed.
Yeah. There's definitely some pretty intense moments during, when Doss is trying to rescue guys. And the wildest part is that a ton of this is true. There's a moment just a few minutes after this one where he rescues a man, one of his, friends from the company, who is freaking out because he's blind. And Doss pours water in his eyes. And it turns out that he just had a bunch of sort of debris in his face and he couldn't see. And the guy is just over the moon. He's going, I thought I was blind. And that apparently happened in real life.
Yeah, he talks about it at the very end of the movie when we get to see some of the interview bits. Now we're done with Doss, and he's telling that story very proudly. Yeah. It was really cute.
Doss is forced to hide out in the Japanese caves underground for a little while, and he actually saves a wounded Japanese soldier while he's down there. And it's funny because while he's lowering these guys off the cliff, he's also occasionally lowering a wounded Japanese soldier if he finds one. And there's an orderly who's telling Captain Glover about it, and he's like, yeah, he's even lowering some Japanese soldiers down. They didn't make it. Very curtain cold. As the Japanese continue to hunt him, Doss continues to rescue wounded men throughout the night, and he's saying, please, Lord, help me get one more. And this is the sort of recurring thing that he keeps saying, that he just wants to get one more. When you see him interviewed at the end of the movie, that's what he's saying. The real Desmond Doss was praying to God and saying that he just wanted help to get one more.
You need to say it right, Sam.
You need to say it right. I did the voice the last time.
Yeah, we'll do it at the end. We'll both say it. I'm just gonna take the L here and run away.
I did enjoy how we were talking about this offline, and Mart writes, I'm not religious, but please God, help him get one Moah. Moah.
Yeah, and this is where we all should finish our drink, because he says it a bunch of times.
Yeah, we're literally before it happened, we're like, oh, it's coming. He's going to say the help me get one more line.
So Sergeant Howell, who was a dick to him earlier, played by Vince Vaughn, is also wounded, and he attempts to rescue him. And while this is happening, Captain Clover learns that he's still up on a ridge, and that he saved quite a number of men that they had thought were surely lost. So Doss does come down, but he's pursued by some Japanese soldiers. We need to talk about the scene with Sergeant Howell on his blanket, shooting at the Japanese.
Please. Okay. So Doss takes the rifle and Howell is like, well, he says something snarky about how it's a little late for target practice. And then Doss wraps the rifle in a blanket and then he tells Howell to get on the blanket so he'll drag him. And like, he normally will just carry people, but in real life and in the movie, Vince Vaughn is an enormous man. And so this would be very difficult for someone Andrew Garfield size to do. So he's like, get on the blanket, I'll drag you. And so Howell gets on the blanket, he's facing backwards, and Doss is running, dragging him, and Howell is shooting Japanese that are following them. It made me laugh a little bit.
Yeah, it's just a bit of a like computer game kind of side quest.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be like serious and heroic, but it's also a little funny.
It is a little funny. I did like, so when Doss he rescues Howell, and when he finally gets down the cliff, there's a whole bunch of guys there because now they figured out that he's rescuing all these guys and they're like, what the heck? Like, this guy's a nut, but he's a hero. So he gets to the bottom and it's like the sort of shock of the past like 48 hours or so catches up with him, and he's very, very skittish and he doesn't want people to touch him. And you could tell that he's sort of like looking around and feeling like he's cornered. And I thought Andrew Garfield acted that very well, because that's probably how you would feel coming out of, a war zone once the adrenaline starts to wear off.
Yeah, it's almost like he couldn't tell the difference in that very first moment between the Americans and the Japanese. Like he was actually ready to hurt someone by the looks of it. I don't know how I would feel if I'd been up there for 48 hours, but probably also not that good.
Yeah. And then he's a little banged up. So he's in the hospital and he gets to see his handiwork. All these guys that he saved that probably wouldn't have made it were it not for him. Captain Glover comes over and, apologizes to him and says, look, I didn't see what kind of person you were before, but I see it now, kind of thing. And you do see Captain Glover interviewed as well at the end of the movie and admitting, like, look, at first I didn't want Doss beside me. I didn't think that he was going to be, the kind of soldier that we needed. And then he really proved himself. So that was kind of nice. And the company are supposed to go back up over the ridge, but at that point it's a Saturday, which, as you may recall, is Doss's Sabbath. And so Captain Glover says, look, I respect you now. I respect that this is your Sabbath. Like, let me know. So Doss agrees to go, but he wants to pray first. And so they're all waiting for him to finish reading his Bible and praying. And, one of the brass calls down and they're like, what the heck? You're supposed to be going over that ridge. And Captain Glover is like, well, we're waiting for Private Doss to finish praying for us. And that apparently did also happen in real life, which is kind of wild. And it just goes to show the level of respect that Doss earned himself by his actions. And so they go up over the ridge. We get more bloody combat, and Doss is ultimately wounded, kicking a grenade away from his men. Again, really happened, supposedly. And as he's being evacuated, he's told that the Americans successfully took the ridge.
Yeah, there's a moment also when he's still in the medical tent, and you can see him standing there and he's wounded, and he asks about one of the other two medics, and the doctor or the surgeon tells him that he's dead, and you can see him decide, okay, if there's not going to be another medic up there, I have to go up there. So it's another one of those really, there's the conviction again. I thought this was so well acted as well, and insane.
Yeah, it's truly a wild story. I am really glad that they made it into a movie, and so many of the things that happened are, truth is way stranger than fiction. When we were watching the documentary and all these guys that Desmond served with were being interviewed and talking about all this stuff that had happened, you're just like, wow. Wow, all this stuff really went down just like this.
The captain actually in the interview is crying also. I'm like, oh God, Desmond Doss must have been a really inspiring person to be around once they started believing that he was an actual good person and not a lunatic.
Yeah, I looked into it a little bit, and so in real life he had, and this would have been the case for a lot of guys, he had a different CO in training than he did when he actually went into battle. And so Captain Glover, played by Sam Worthington, and the one who was interviewed at the end of the movie, that was his, of course, captain on Okinawa, but his captain in training was this guy named Cunningham, and that was the CO who like really had it out for him. And it was funny because he was not interviewed in the documentary. I believe he had passed away before that, but they interviewed a lot of the other guys in the company, and these were guys who freely admitted that when they first met Doss, they're like, yeah, we participated in hazing him because we thought he was a coward and we didn't think that he was going to measure up. And even all these guys were admitting that were like, Cunningham was such a dick. Like, we hated that guy. Even after the war, we always talked about how much we didn't like him. So apparently not a popular figure.
The movie ends with a little end card telling us that Desmond Doss was the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor. He and Dorothy were married until her death in 1991, and he died in Alabama in 2006. And you told me he did get remarried, which made me happy, because otherwise he would have been alone a long time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I believe Dorothy had cancer, and Desmond was taking her to the hospital for treatment, and they got into a car accident.
Oh, no.
Yeah, very sad. But he did remarry a couple of years later, so he wasn't, alone or anything like that.
Good.
So Doss saved approximately 75 men on Okinawa, which is a truly wild number when you think that he was lowering them down a cliff face by himself. He had previously been awarded 2 Bronze Stars for his actions on Guam and the Philippines, and then, of course, he got the Medal of Honor for his actions on Okinawa. He was wounded 4 times. And so he also has a Purple Heart. And he was ultimately evacuated on May 21st, 1945. And his arm was really badly damaged. I believe he got hit by a sniper in the arm after he had already been wounded. And it prevented him from returning to his work as a carpenter after the war. And he just couldn't win. He also contracted tuberculosis during his service, which ended up costing him a lung and 5 ribs. And ultimately, he also lost his hearing when the army overdosed him on antibiotics. And so he really, he paid a high price for his service during the war, and his only son also went on to become an army medic.
Wow. Talk about a guy who's been through a lot, but who just can't be killed. And it's stuff like that makes me wonder if there's a God out there. Because clearly he's been, through the eye of the needle. Pretty amazing. How is this a real story? How is this an actual man that walked the earth?
I know. It's so wild too when this happens all the time when you see interviews with these guys when they're a lot older, and he doesn't regard his actions as particularly heroic. He says, the real heroes are still buried over there. And that's like a pretty common thing, but it's also just extraordinary. What would motivate you to keep going when it's the middle of the night and you're being hunted by the Japanese, and and you're lowering guys one at a time, and you don't even really know if you're making a difference.
Yeah, it's so hard for me to relate to having that kind of faith, because I obviously don't. Just convictions that strong must be like a drug, really, because they just make you believe that you can do it. And I can't really fault anyone for wanting to have that kind of belief, even if I don't believe it myself.
Yeah, for sure.
We do need to rate this movie.
And what are we going to rate it?
And we are going to rate it 1 more out of 10.
Yay!
You go first.
All right. I'm going to rate this movie 7.5 1 Moahs out of 10. Please, God, let me get 1 more. Because I have seen this movie more than once. I find it emotionally affecting. I thought it is well put together in that way. And I thought it's, I think Andrew Garfield is spectacular in it, the way I think he's spectacular in everything. The battle scenes are pretty gritty and brutal and bloody. If that's what you're into, you'll definitely enjoy that. Like I said, when I first saw this movie, I was a bit worried that it was going to be one of those movies that you can tell is, made by very religious people, and they want to sort of push a certain idea on you. And that wasn't really the impression I got from the movie. They really focus a lot on, yes, these are religious convictions, but also these are personal convictions, and these are principles. And he acted on those and stood by those and ended up saving a lot of lives, and other people respected him for that. So it was also a very kind of human story. So yeah, I did enjoy this movie. I would recommend it.
I would too. I would give it 7 one more out of 10. And I think I would have rated it higher before I watched it this time. And I'm not sure why, but maybe I'm getting slightly sensitive about violence. This movie is so graphic, and I could have done without some of those scenes, and also without some of the awful slow motion scenes at the end, because I hate those. But the acting is good, especially by Andrew Garfield. I do think he carries this movie. And the music's fun, and the cinematography is quite good. So overall, it's very good, but it's slightly on the violent side for me. So that's why it's only 7 one more out of 10.
How do you think this compares to the episode Baston from Band of Brothers?
It's very different, I would say. Obviously, both men are very religious, or not very, but I don't know if I would say that Eugene Rowe is very religious, but we do see him pray, and I feel like Rowe gets more disillusioned than Desmond Doss does. Baston is obviously my favorite episode of Band of Brothers, and I think I prefer that still to this movie, but they're close in terms of storytelling. So
the storytelling thing is kind of where I was coming from, just from the perspective of it's pretty unique to see a focus on someone who is being subjected to the violence and is there sort of within the violence, but is not participating in it themselves, and sort of how that informs how they behave and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's another thing that I thought about earlier before we started recording and then forgot. But obviously Rowe, especially at the beginning of the episode, keeps his distance from the men, like getting to know them by their nicknames. And Doss is very different. Doss is like very friendly to all the men in our town. He's like talking to them by their first names, and he's like, I'm gonna take care of you and you're gonna be alright. He's almost a little cheerful when he's talking to them, which is very different from Rowe. Rowe kind of becomes sort of detached almost from the men.
Yeah, I think crucially, Doss really wanted to be a combat medic and Rowe really didn't.
Yeah, I think, Rowe was obviously rushed into it, and Doss made a conscious choice to go and be one.
Yeah, I think really for Doss, the movie makes it clear that he really thinks of this as a calling. He feels like it's his duty to participate in the war, and he doesn't see that as conflicting with his religious ideals because he can save lives instead of taking them. And then, for someone like Eugene Rowe to sign up to be, a combat soldier, and then for someone to just take his rifle away and be like, no, you're a medic now.
I'm not sure if our listeners know that generally people didn't get to pick to be a medic. They were just selected to be medics. So that's what Sam is talking about here. Rowe just got picked to be one. It wasn't a choice.
Yeah. And Doss really wanted to be one, and they didn't want to let him.
Right. Which is stupid. But yeah, good story.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for listening. You can follow us and give us 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. You can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com.
Perfect.
We didn't talk about what we're reading.
Oh, what are you reading?
I think I'm probably reading the same thing you are. I'm still reading my World War II Fighter Plane Spotter's Guide because I don't have a lot of time or brain space to read anything more serious.
True. I actually got all my 3 books that I ordered about planes. One is the Plane Spotter's book, and another one is like technical drawings of planes, which is really nerdy but really cool. It shows you all the different parts of the plane, and you get a blueprint of a plane, and it's really cool. The reason I'm getting all these books is because I want to draw planes. So I also got a book that was apparently first published during World War II, and it's called How to Draw a Fighter Plane, I believe, but it's terrible. It's not a very good book. The drawings are awful. There's no actual instructions in there. It's like, right, here's the plane. Now start drawing. There's only instructions.
You guys have seen a plane, right? Draw one.
Yeah, so that's the drawing book. That's really just a bad book. I feel like I was scammed.
Here's what we'll do for the fans. You draw a plane and I'll draw a plane. And we'll put them both on our Instagram and people can vote on whose plane is better.
Okay, I'll take that. I'll do that.
Guys, it's not a contest. My plane is not going to be better.
It might be. It might just be really like colorful and cheerful. You can draw a cheerful plane.
It might have a certain Picasso-ishness to it in the sense that nothing is the right size or in the right place.
Before we forget, next week on Rosie the Reviewer, we are talking about the best years of our lives. All right.
Bye.
Bye.